Okay. All right. So welcome everybody into my DAX introduction, just kind of getting started, right? I kind of called this a back to basics meeting. I've given this for a client where they don't have a lot of people that know DAX. That's kind of where it started. When we were doing a survey last, I don't know, a couple months ago, the main topic that came back that everybody wanted was DAX. So we had a DAX generation topic last month where Mike Carlo showed us how to quickly generate templates, using templates to generate DAX into your model. So today we're going to go back a little bit further and just kind of talk through some basics of DAX and how to get started with it. All right, so with that, let me just get into it. I got to turn, I'm seeing the transcript window and I was reading everything I was saying. Okay, so it was really weird.
That's awesome.
And for those, I think almost everybody here knows me. If you don't, that's what I look like, and you can see what I look like. And my little avatar that you see around Twitter, which is where I hang out at quite a bit. We were talking about that when we first came up. So you can just find me at Kev Arnold on Twitter. Or on LinkedIn. Kev Arnold is at the end of my LinkedIn profile link. So feel free to connect with me on either one of those platforms. I'm always open to taking questions off of those platforms, helping out wherever I can. Okay, so what do we want to do today? Well, let's learn a little bit more about DAX, but let's back all the way up to, what is DAX? How does the data model and DAX work together? Then we'll introduce a little bit more of the functions by talking about the basic groups that the functions come into. We'll go through some very basic exercises. That's where I have a Power BI desktop file open. And then hopefully we'll have enough time to get into some time intelligence exercises. So bear with me just a couple more slides and then we'll get into the live part of the demo. Okay, so what is DAX? Right, so the first part is it explains right there, data analysis expressions. It's a formula expression language. So what that means is everything that you use, it says formula. I think it's, oh, okay, the last sentence to me is what's more important. It's a functional language, right? So everything that you use in it is calling functions, and you could call functions that return certain objects. If that return type works within another function, you use the functions within the functions. And so it's very Excel function-like, but it's a lot different than Excel functions. A lot of them look exactly the same, right? But an Excel function is working on a particular cell to where a DAX measure is going to work on a intersection. Think of like within a matrix, and we'll talk about this here in just a little bit too. I think we will. Okay, so the DAX formulas, and that's why it's a formula expression language. So you can build out these formula expressions. And those expressions are used in measures, which is what we're going to focus on today. That's why I have it underlined. But they could also be used to build calculated columns, calculated tables, and within row level security. So within row level security, they're providing the filtering, an additional filtering context for when you want to have row level security. It's a little bit more of an advanced topic than a beginner part would come in. So we'll focus again on measures, which is the primary place everybody uses them. I'm not going to demo anything on calculated columns or calculated tables, but they can be used right in there. Okay, so measures. These are dynamic calculation formulas. And this last three words is the biggest part that gets everybody, right? Because the results change depending on the context. And the next question would be the context of what? Well, it's the context of the data model at the time the measure is being evaluated. So what is sliced down, right? What does each one of the tables look like when that measure is being evaluated? Whether a slicer is impacting that table, a filter, or code within the measure itself. Um, and also within the measure, it's possible to change that context. So that's why you always have to think about depending on the context, and the context is again going to be done at each execution of the measure, not like a whole, like it doesn't just happen once for a visual. Think about every time that that measure is returning a data point, the execution is happening again, and the context can be different on that run. In fact, the context would be different on that run. This is a statement that comes from the Italians, and if you're not familiar with the Italians, it's SQL BI. Marco and Alberto, they are known as um, the premier people with DAX. I think one of them's up in Chicago giving a class right now. Somebody I know, I think is in that class. I just saw a message from her. But they do a lot of teaching on DAX. They have a lot of books on DAX. I'll probably jump over to one of their websites. If you're gonna look up the functions, DAX Stock Guide is their website. To me, that's the better documentation than Microsoft's documentation. In fact, let me put that into the chat. Okay, so we now have a better understanding of what DAX is. But in order for you to work with your DAX and for your DAX to work correctly, you must understand your data model. So hopefully this is big enough here. So this is a typical data model. It's a very small one. It's got sales, and the sales is what we'll call the fact table, because everything else is influencing this table by these relationships in the direction of the filtering. So these would, the geography, date, product, and manufacturer would all be considered that impact this fact table. And the fact table is where these dimensions join together. So like if you just put product with date and you tried to put some measure between them, it would just cross join these two tables and give you a row for every table that exists in those two, because there's, unless the measure comes from the sales table, like if I just had and I'll show you some of this later on, but if I just had a measure that didn't use the sales table, these two would cross join and I would just get the Cartesian product between them. Hopefully that came through well. So you must understand your data model before writing your measure, right? You have to know what all of this is. And as we talked many times in this meeting, and I'm sure in other meetings that you've been, you want to have a star schema that's the best approach. Limit snowflake when needed. So in this case, manufacturer filtering down to product filtering down to sales. That's what's called a snowflake, right? Because this snowflake's off, the manufacturer doesn't go directly to sales. Some people would change this and move the manufacturer ID directly onto the sales table during the transformations, typically performed in Power Query or up in your database engine. But there is sometimes functionality where you want it to work this way for other reasons. This is fine. It's a limited snowflake, but you do want to try to, at least get to a star schema to where all of the dimensions are influencing to the fact table. You want that to be with one-to-many relationships in the single direction, right? So I think we've talked about this. You can see the ones on the dimension side, the many's on, in this case down here, the fact, the many's on the product here. So this one-to-many propagates down through this one-to-many. And so, this will select a set of products, which then will filter, the sales to be only for those products, because we could see everything flows down to the fact table. We don't have anything going bidirectional. There are small use cases for bidirectional, but if you have to use it, you might want to research a little bit more of how you could get around from using the bidirectional filters.
Hey, Kevin, can I ask you a
Yeah,
question? This is
yeah.
kind of about modeling, so if you want to defer it, that's fine. Sometime recently, Power BI updated where the relationships, they have a different ending where it looks like they're kind of disconnected from the table. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you seen that?
Yeah, those are called weak relationships.
What are
And
you saying to me? I'm sorry.
weak,
Just joking. You calling me
yeah.
weak? I got them all over the place.
Are you using composite models?
No.
You're not using the direct query part? I've only seen them pop up when
I'll
I'm
see if I can.
doing a
Okay.
composite direct query model.
I'll see if I can get an example.
Okay, yeah, that might be good for our after session, because I'd like to see if it's fully import mode and you're doing that, that would be interesting to see why it's doing it. I can't remember off the top of my head why it would. But this last line comes from actually, a couple times answering questions for people. And there was a few people that were surprised when I gave this answer, but the majority of your time, your measures are going to come off of the fact table. And I'm going to have a exercise where we use the product table, and we use the product from the product table, and we use the product from sales, and we'll see how we get different results. Um, you, I would, over 90% of the time, you want to have your measure based on something from a fact table. So make sure you're thinking about that as you're putting this together. If you're not building in this model, since sales is the only fact table, if we're not building the measure off of a column in the fact table, we ought to be wondering why, right? And we ought to make sure we justify that that's what we want, that we want to actually do it that way, because we might not get the same results. Well, we won't get the same results, and it probably is not going to be what you want. Okay, so the functions are the most important part of DAX. So understanding where these functions kind of come into. And I think I saw this. I don't remember. I think somebody just tweeted it one time. I don't know who I'm supposed to credit it to. But it's kind of common enough. You've seen it in other places. So aggregation functions. This is the bread and butter of what we end up using, right? So things like sum, max. They put divide in here as an aggregation function. I would call it more, it's a good, safe operator, right? It's a replacement for the divide operator, rather than using divide and potentially getting rather than using a slash to do the division and potentially getting an error, you use the divide. So I don't really think this aggregates like what sum and max concatenate does, but it's an important function to know. Then logic and statements. So if or switch, you see a lot used within logic, right? To have an if condition branching within your measure, or a switch to have a lot of branching within your measure. Var, which stands for variable, and return. Whenever you use a variable, you're going to have to use a return. And then double ampersand, which is a logical and. Um, it almost seems like they have the divide operator here. If we talk about operators, right, you have a divide operator, you have an add operator, a multiply operator. Those type of things, they're not functions, right? Just like on your calculator, it's an operator between two numbers. And then the logical or, which is two pipes. So you could use these to help logic and to help build out your expressions, the statements within your DAX measure. And then table functions is another big group. So there's summarize, there's summarize columns, which is used in a query a whole lot more than a measure. Generate will generate multiple rows based upon what you give to it. Values is one that I use quite a bit. I will get the values from a particular column. And when you get those values, you get the values gives you the distinct list of it. And so now you know what you're working with. So you want to know, if you want something distinct, you could use values. Instead of a count distinct, you could use values and then count the return of the values, and that gives you a distinct count. And actually is supposedly runs faster too. Row actually turns produces a row within a table. So it's going to be a single row for it. Then you could use it to kind of help build tables out if you needed to. And then filter functions. So they're including calculate in here as a filter function, which is true because you could run calculate table. Calculate table would actually fall in the table functions. But calculate is going to allow you to modify your filtering, i.e. your context inside your data model in order to produce different results. Filter function is one that a lot of people tend to learn early. And then all removes the current context. So you get everything, say, in all of a particular table. It gives you everything for that table. It removes filtering, right? So understanding kind of how these all fit in. And then let me go back to this one. You guys were seeing this already. Let's go back to DAX.guide because they group them as well. So if we look at their groups, they just generically talk about functions.
It's right there on the main pane. If you just look at the main pane.
Oh yeah, that too. Thanks. Yeah, so here they give the definition of each one as well, right? And so they go into a whole lot more groupings, right? But we talk about the aggregation functions, and I was going to go down this way because, I didn't realize it was going to change. You can see there's a whole lot more than what was put on that original slide, and we'll talk about the X and why those come up here in just a little bit as well. But in trying to learn the language, I do recommend, I know it's like reading the dictionary, but just come out here and start looking at these different groups and start seeing what they put within the different groups. Like this one, probably don't use most anything from this. Maybe you do, right? I guess, has one filter, has one value, is blank sometimes, maybe is cross filter, right? But just coming out here to see the number of functions that are available in the language, and then, maybe you could find something that you're looking for once you get the concepts down. Filter functions. So these calculated they do fall within a filter function as well. A lot of these modifiers, we're not going to go deep into each one of what they are. Remove filters is a nice filter function to remove filters. So, again, kind of try to, in learning the language, instead of getting overwhelmed learning, try to individual things, think a little bit higher conceptually at a conceptual level and go, what kind of function might that be? And then that'll help you come in here to navigate what you want to see. Data types are very important. Okay, so a measure doesn't only have to return a numeric data type. Most of the time, that's what you want it to do to work on your visual correctly. But also, a lot of times, people return a measure and they return a string. Think about writing a custom measure to produce a dynamic title, right? So you're writing DAX, and you're returning a string. So you could definitely return strings. It doesn't just have to be numeric data types. It was actually one of those things for me when I first started working with it. And I just kept thinking, because other languages forced me to always return something that was a number, right? Or a Boolean. Then all of a sudden one day I was going, I need to do this. And I go, oh yeah, wait, I think I've seen that measures could return a text, a string. And, it just opened up a whole new world.
Yes,
Operator.
I'm sorry, the word
Go ahead.
variant was at the end of that list. What
Yeah.
is variant?
Be careful in any language that does variant. Variant is like here, what it has an example is if the measure is greater than 0, it's going to return a number 1. Otherwise, it's going to return a string of NA. Okay. Now, so that's why it's variant. It means in one execution, it can return a number, and another execution, it will return a string.
I kind of feel like DAX complains about so many things I write, and it doesn't complain about this. Now I get it's because
Well,
it could be
because this
hard
is
for it to know. This is an
this,
obvious case. A more
yeah. Well,
complicated case, it couldn't figure out.
this is built in. It's done on purpose. There's reasons behind. In a way, almost everything's treated as a variant until the very end.
Okay.
But
Okay.
yeah, this is on purpose. This is very acceptable. But be careful if you're writing something and you're trying to return a variant. And I'm not going to go deep into it. I don't think I do it very much. Okay, so then operators, right? Like we talked about, is pretty much your normal, like your calculator type setup, right? So you're going to have parentheses to help you, your please forgive my dear Aunt Sally, right? So you can figure out your order of operations. We got plus and minus. So we got plus and minus is one way to actually give a sign for a number, but it's also, depending on where it's used, right? It's addition, subtraction. And then multiplication and division. But we try not to use this division, the slash, use the divide function instead, because it's safer. Not is going to be a logical negation. So you could say not in, where in is an inclusive OR list. So instead of having, say, a whole bunch of ORs. And then we kind of talked about, right, your logical and your logical OR. And then you got comparison operators. And then you got statements. And mostly talking about measures, this measure statement is already built into Power BI for you. But then you could use variables. And once you use a variable, you have to use a return. Okay, we're not going to go deep into a lot of these other ones, or we're not going to go into these at all. Just be aware that they're out there. But when you create a measure in Power BI, behind the scenes, it's adding this word and the name, right? So you see the name and the equal sign and then your code, but it's putting this into the model for you behind the scenes. Okay, so that's kind of a good way to help you learn DAX, right? Kind of back to basics. How do you get started? Think conceptually and then work your way down. All right, so now we're going to switch over and we're going to get into some very basic exercises. And for a lot of people that have done DAX, these first couple ones are going to be extremely basic, and you'll understand why. But we're starting right from the very beginning and moving forward. So I'm going to keep this slide off screen. I might move it in and out a little bit as I start talking through what exercises I'm going to do. All right, so let me change up my setup. And if there's anything, let me check the chat. See that there was just this, thanks, Donald. Nice grouping slide. Yeah, I like the concept of grouping as well. Let me bring over Power BI. If anybody besides Amin's got questions, feel free to jump in, and Amin can too, but I know he's not shy. He'll just bring up questions. Okay. Gonna take one more drink. All right, so you see this is, again, the same data model that I had in the earlier picture. And so the majority of our measures, we're going to build off of this sales table. And we'll do one or two without it, and we'll see what happens with it. So let's go to the report part. And the first one that I want to build is going to be total sales. So we know the mechanics of this. We're going to come and say new measure. It's going to bring our lineup. And I can make it bigger for y'all. So this is a reserved word, but it's the first word that it puts in when defining a new measure. So we're going to change this to call it total sales. And we're just going to simply use the sum function. Ooh, that's interesting on how it got bigger. And this is another way to help you learn. This is a little new to me. Control and space. If I click on that, add all the numbers in a column. That's interesting. I never noticed that before. Has anybody else noticed those little information messages over there?
I have not, but I like it because it's just written very simply and plainly. This is what we're going to do.
Yeah, I'm going to reduce this back down and see if those go away. They don't.
Do you think this is a new feature of the updated desktop?
It could be, because I'm like you, I don't remember seeing it. Read more, control in space. So if I do control in space, and nothing happened.
Are you running a beta version?
No, I'm on this. I am on the very latest plus the bug fix that they put out. So it's the very, very latest. But anyways.
So I'm just curious to know before you leave, like, what does it say for summarized columns?
So this is interesting because now if I could get this even has multiple pages, summarized columns. It gives more information. But I can't get it to do it again. So if I use my keyboard and go down, then hit information, it says create a summary table for the requested totals over a set of groups. Interesting. And then if I just use my keyboard and page up and down, yeah, then it changes what it's doing, what it's showing.
Thank you.
Sure. See, now this one, it even though it gave me the set of columns, it put it up top, which is a better user experience, and it tells you add all the numbers in the column. All right, so we know we're going to use our sales table. So I'm going to say sales, because remember, that's what we were talking about. And this total sales is going to be in this case, revenue. So we're going to pick a column. Now let's talk at this point just a little bit about naming conventions. Whenever you're choosing a column, you want to always preface it with the table name. And this will help you later on when you're going through and debugging your DAX or trying to remember what it was doing. It's only if you're using another measure from the model that you exclude the table name. So without a table name prefix, it should be a measure. With the table name prefix, it is a column, right? Even though if I remove this, this is going to work, right? It's not going to complain or give me an error, but it's harder to know that I'm trying to reference a column because of that. So the best practice is to put the table name in front of it. Okay, so then you just hit check on your formula bar. It tries to auto detect what it's going to be here. Every measure has to be anchored to a table, even though you don't have, right? You don't have to think like I'm using that table. It doesn't. You could put all your measures into one table. You could put them into many different tables. A good practice is to put it into the table it's referring to, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. So that's what this home table is. So what our name is, what our format, and then even for currency, I like to come back and tell it I want 2 decimal places. So now we could use this on our report. And if I just click on it, it's going to put some type of default visual together, which is just going to be a bar chart. And it gives me what the total sales are. Now, when I add other information to this visual, like if I add the year to it. So what we just talked about earlier was the context for when this runs. I don't know why it's, oh, it's skipping some stuff. So there, for this chart to be rendered, it needed to run that measure 3 times. And it returned 3 different values each time, right? So in each time, there was a different context that was be given to that measure. So if we think about with that measure, it was saying, I want total sales. And so in this case, it's saying, I want total sales with the year equal to January 2019. Here it's saying with the year equal to January 2020. And here, this is going to be with the year equal 2020. This one's that. Wait. This, I don't know why the legend's off down here. It's kind of weird. This is saying for 2018, 2019, I'd have to fix that with, I think it's, if I did that, it works. It's something with, I think what in this model, this year is actually a date, and then it's just formatted differently. So sorry, that was bothering my OCD. I had to fix that. So it first it evaluated it for the year 2018. Then another evaluation with the year filtered down to 2019, and a third evaluation with it filtered down to 2020, right? So if you're imagining that, think about it spinning through and doing that each time. It's just DAX is, the engine is very fast at doing that, okay? If I change this visual to a matrix, how many times does the evaluation context, does the measure execute that's now? Any guesses?
3 times. 3?
Nope. 4.
Because of total.
The total. See, and that's, and I'll show you another little example of this, but each one of these points is a new evaluation of the measure. So the total is its own evaluation. The total is not adding up these numbers. And there is a use case where these numbers could add up differently than what you see in the total, because it does execute for every point within here. So now if we add the month into this as a set of columns, and I don't like how this was set up. Let's do it with just number.
Yeah, you took your month, but you have a month up above it. No, is that what
Oh, did I grab the wrong one?
Yeah, there's a month up at the top of there. Is that the one?
Thank you.
Right.
Okay. So now expanding on that thought, right? Each one of these numbers, and I don't know how many times it's going to be in here. Maybe somebody faster in math could do that in their head. But this is an execution, here's an execution, here's an execution, and this total's an execution, right? So 4 times 12 is well, actually 4
Yeah, it's
times
more.
13
Yeah.
because it's happening for the total each time as well.
Wow. That's a lot of sales.
That's a good amount of sales. It's just a matter, don't worry about that number, right? Think about, again, what's coming out of how this visual is being produced. And that each time, in this case now, it's saying, I want the total sales for the filter context, the year equals 2018, and the filter context, the month equals January. And that's the value that's returned. And that happens each time here. So that's how this filter context changes every single time your measure is being evaluated. And that's an extremely important concept.
I guess that also, you mentioned earlier about how using values is more efficient when you're counting values instead of running distinct. And this kind of drives that home. I mean, if you're using that in a DAX formula and it's going to be calculated, every single like 52 times or 152 times, then it really matters.
Yep. So let's change this and let's take a look at what that's not where I wanted it. Let's put it over to columns. Let's take a look at what our mixes are. Actually, I'm going to switch these two. Okay. I'm sorry, I said mix, but what our categories are. Sorry, I'm holding off a sneeze. 1 second. Okay, I don't think I'm going to sneeze. Hopefully I'll hit the mic fast enough if I do. So now if we look at this and we could see in 2018, we had, what is it? $7.1 million in sales for the category of mix. And what if we wanted to just isolate out what is in the mix category? So we could do that by writing in another measure. And if we go back to sales, we do new measure again. And we say total sales for mix product category. Long name. So we're going to introduce a new function now, and we're going to do this first off with calculate, right? Because calculate helps us change. It evaluates the expression in context modified by the filters. So we could apply a new filter to this to change what the value of the expression is. So we could come back and we could reuse a measure in this case. So we're going to reuse total sales. And remember, on the standard that we were talking about, I won't preface that by the table, even though that's sitting in the sales table. I'm going to leave it without the table name. And now I could set a new filter context. And what I want to do is set category, which is going to be product category. And you can see Power BI helps us. In this case, it puts the table name in front of the column for us. So just don't change it and it's going to work. And we could simply say equals MIX. We could close that out. Tell it to save. We're going to format it down to 2 because it's a new measure. Okay, so now let's add this to our matrix and discuss what's going on. Oops, wrong place.
Excuse me, I didn't see the measure.
Okay. So we're using calculate to say, right, we're going to reuse the measure we produced the first time, which is just the sum of revenue. And we're setting, this kind of looks funny the way it, there we go. That looks better. So then we're going to change the filter context so that product category is always set to mix no matter what the product category is currently. Okay?
Thank you.
Sure. Just let me move off of it. And
Kevin, can I ask you just maybe to
hang on, let me just
join?
finish it. Let me finish explaining this now. Let me make this table bigger because you guys might not be able to see it as easily. Okay, so now if we look at the values in this table, so we see we still got the same values for our total sales, but in this case, oh, that I didn't set that to 2. Okay, so you can see here for 2018, when the category is mix, our measure gets the exact same value as when we're forcing it to be mix. But now when our category changes to rule, it's still the value for mix because our measure is forcing it to be mixed. And you can see that's consistent all the way through. So Amin, you had another question?
Well, I was going to say, if you could go back to the model view and show us, because that filter, the calculate was using product category equals mix, right? And you were making this point about, yeah, where's that? So that's
here.
Yeah.
And so that's using this relationship to filter this table. And at the same time, I have date in there. So this relationship is filtering this table.
Yeah, I just thought it's nice because you said you want to have these relationships pointing towards the fact table, and you write your measures on the fact table, and this is why it works.
Mm-hmm.
So it's great.
Okay. So hopefully now that makes sense, how you could override and force your filtering context. So, and I could take this. I actually have another exercise where it says well, let's do it real quick. I'm gonna grab this one. I'm gonna copy. Try to make things a little bit faster. And I'm gonna go ahead and create a new one. That now what we're gonna say is let's force this to be product category, the mixed product category, but it's only for the year 2020. So what I could do is just add a new filter onto the end of this, and where I'm going to say, I actually think this doesn't work because this model, whoever produced it, which probably would have been, yeah, it came to me and I reused it. Equals 2020. I think the date needs you to go away. I think this is actually a date column, and this is actually a good reason to understand it's going to fail. Let me move on until I pass. Okay. So let's look, like Amin was saying, let's go back and look at the data model.
Yeah, and you might also look at the question, which is also related to data model, that was just posted by Office Manager.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if we look at year and we look at the properties of year, notice its data type is date time. And then it has a custom format, which is just to display the year out. So whoever put this together in the first place, whether it was me or somebody else, there is a trick that you could use that you don't have to make your year or your month a numeric. You could just change the format string, and then you have a date that's actually behind the scenes. But it also could end up hurting, it could end up meaning you have to code things a little bit differently. So I'll finish coding that out. So let's say, what happens to the filter context if you have no relationship, no star schema, for example, one single table? So if you just have that one single table, the filtering is going to be all done on that one table, but there is a feature in the engine called auto exist that is there to make things faster, that if you put multiple filters on that one table, it may not always return. I can't remember exactly what auto exist does off the top of my head because I hardly ever run into it being used, but it's something that where the engine makes assumptions of what is going to exist, and you could end up missing rows because of it. I think Donald's typing some of the stuff, so he might have a better answer to help me out. We'll wait for him to finish in between his. Oh, he's talking about how to change my other stuff. So yes, Donald, we're going to get to that. But yeah, and honestly, your performance and your DAX code will be easier if you set up a star schema. It's especially the performance of your slicer visuals. If you use one big table and you want to have a drop down for what the products are, and you got a multi-million row start or multi-million row sales table, in order for it to get that unique set of products, it could end up reading more rows than it needs to, than if you just had a product table. So there's a lot of reasons to make sure you have things as a star, but it is the best practice, and it's just going to work better. All right, so let's get back to, we have our total sales mix for, now we're trying to say is because I thought it would have been just with 2020. And if we try to put that on here, right, our expected value should come back to this, right? Because this is our mix category for 2020. So I'm going to put this onto a new visual.
Excuse
That was
me, sorry, I missed the last measure, and I've been working on something and really need to see that, if you
Okay.
don't mind.
The one where it's doing two things.
With the year, it's filtering.
Yeah, but that's what I was trying to get to, is why this isn't working. So don't
Oh,
take
that's
this
not
one
working?
yet.
Okay,
This one won't work yet. The
okay,
reason it won't work is because we went and looked at this year column, and it's actually a date time. It's not just a number.
okay.
So I left this in here because I originally thought I was going to take it out of this presentation, but I left it in order to show, right? Not only do you have to study your model to understand what this, schema looks like, you have to understand your model down to sometimes a field level. And so now this is a date time. So I have to code this measure differently than what you might have to in some other models, that it's just the numeric, just the year itself. And so just like what Donald has is use, and he's got a function in the chat, date 2020, comma 1, which says it is going to be January 1st. So the year 2020, month 1, January, day 1.
just to be clear, like this is assuming the most likely thing is that the date for 2020 is 1/1/2020. Why would it be anything else? But there was nothing in we didn't see anything that told us, right, that it is actually January 1st.
So that's where you might need to come into here and actually start looking at your date table and see, this one is using DAX to build the date table. I'm going to try to get rid of this. And let's see what this displays.
And I just also think this is a great example where what you were talking about, I would have come to this view to see what kind of data is in the year column. And if I look at this, it looks like a number.
Right.
Then it's good. It shows up there. It shows date time is the format. And it's got, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if I would have looked at that. I would have said, oh, it's an integer. Look at it, 2019.
Yeah. So if we look at this bigger setup, so it's just taking a year and it's actually using 12/31 as it's always setting the date to be for whatever the current year is, because it's getting year up here,
Oh, that's great.
and they're always setting it to 12/31. So now that we know that,
Yeah.
let's go back to our mix here, and we're going to set this to 12/31.
You see, you got 13 there.
Well, I want the next month. I looked over when something vibrated. So your calendar doesn't have 13 months?
Not my Gregorian
Okay.
calendar.
So now we have a value. Let's change this to a
Yeah, because it's the 2020. I think you were highlighting 2019 up above.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
So that's
I mean,
this
it
one.
would be. Are you willing to go change it to 1-1 and we'll see what it does?
Well, that's what I had the first time.
Oh, and it just wasn't doing anything?
Yeah, it returned nothing.
Okay. Oh, okay.
If I do 1-1, it's going to return blank because there's nothing that meets this criteria. But if I set it correctly to what is inside my date table, now it meets the criteria, and I could get just the one value that says I want to always display for the product category mix, and the year is 2020. So it's always going to be December 31st, 2020, the way my date calendar, my date table was put together. Now I actually get the value that I'm wanting.
Does DAX let you put a function there on the where it's date of, date year, where you could ask for the year of date year and check if that's 2020?
Yes. So that's another way to write this, right? So again, knowing our functions, there is a year function. It's a very good point. And I could just say that. I'm going to get an error because I got to get this box to go away. Actually, there's no error there, right? So now I could say, that would be another way to write it. Again, there's so many functions available. There's so many different ways to write something. We should get our 10 million again here. So yes, that would be another way to address this. And the point is, right, you're overriding two filters. You're hard coding two filters. So if I put this back up in the matrix visual that I have here, I'm going to have this value repeat just like I have this value for mix repeating all the time, right? To where I have it here. It's this way, it's still sliced by year. But if I add this, we could do this. Go ahead, so you guys could see it. If I add that third measure we produced, move that into a bigger mode, you could see it's always going to be that 10.4 million. It never changes with any other row or column context. No other filtering is impacting that when I'm only using row and year. Now, if I used something else, if I went back to my data model, sorry, and I used geography or something like that, that would still change the results, right? Because that's not being overridden. But I'm only overriding the particular column of category, and I'm only overriding this particular column of year, where other things around this could still influence it. So I'll pause there. Did everybody that wanted to, did you get the measure kind of capture it?
Kevin, this is Michelle.
Mm-hmm.
Could you have just gone into Query Editor and changed the date column to be just date type? And would that
Well,
have made DAX
in this,
happy?
in this case, this date table is being produced by DAX.
Okay.
So what I could do is come in here and I would have to change here what I'm returning, because I'm returning the date. That's what this
Yeah.
whole, and I didn't want to get this deep into, right, all the stuff in DAX, but if people are further than this, you can see here that this is it starts out as one big DAX function of just generate, because this ends down here on line 43. And then they do a filter, and they first use another function, because remember, we could use functions within other functions as long as they return the object type that function returns, or that function needs. So a filter needs its first argument is a table. So this is generating that table using calendar auto. And then here it is filtering that down so that the year of the date, because the calendar auto just returns a single column table with multiple rows, and its one column is date. And so it's saying the year has to be greater than the first year that it calculated off of the sales table in order to continue to be included, because generate, its first argument is a table. So this returns a table that gets filtered, then filter returns that table to generate, and that's generates first argument is a table. Then from there, we have a bunch of variables that are produced, right? This is the next argument to generate, which is going to be an expression. And so we're getting all these variables, and then we have to do a return, and we're using a function called row, and row produces a row with, this is the column name, this is what gets returned, and then it goes through and iterates for each row on this table that comes back. It, again, cycles, it does it row by row.
So this is like,
returns each row.
It's like the X functions, like it's a row context that you get. So on line 18, like is that what generate does?
Yeah, generate is like it's a table function, right? So it's using a table and it's going to generate based upon this table all the rows from it. So yes, it's going to change it all to row by row.
So the console on line 18, line 19, line 20, that's the context is like a particular row in the table that was generated in lines 14 through 17.
Correct.
Row by row by row by row by row. Okay.
Correct. Yep, that's a good way of explaining it. And then it returns a row for each one of those. And that's how all the rows in this table end up being generated, and that's why it looks like. So I could come in here, Michelle, and change it around. And most of the time your date tables are going to be built out with just it being a year. So, but some people do this for valid reasons. Okay, so let's see if we can get through a couple more things. And it's funny because this is the second time I've given this presentation. I haven't made it through the basic exercises either time. And we can stay as long as you guys want, but we are right about 7 o'clock. So, but let's go through and look at the concept that I was talking about. Remember, you want to have your measures produced off of the fact table. But what happens if you don't do that? Okay, so let me look. Sorry, I'm going to get to my page that reminds me. So let's first do a couple measures, and we're going to do it off of the product table. And so I'm going to do a new measure. I'm going to call it count product, which is the table, product ID, which is going to be the column. And so I'm simply going to use the count function, and I'm going to give it my table name, and I'm going to give it my product ID. And the product ID happens to be unique for each row within the product table. So it's very simple, and it comes back as a whole number. So I'm going to put a card out here and then put that value on the card. And we see we come back with 2,412, right? Which is going to be the number of rows that are that's in our product table. So now what we could do is let's do the same type of count, but instead of product ID, we're going to use a different column. We're going to use product category. And so if we say count product category equals, and we're going to say count again, product, and we'll just pick count product category because it's first. So now, do you think it'll be the same, higher, or lower than the product ID?
Can we see the DAX again?
Anybody?
Pretty low, shouldn't it?
And I would tend to guess. You see that I even capitalized something special for you, but it's exactly the same.
It should, isn't there less categories than?
But that's not what we're counting. We're counting the number of occurrence of categories in there, right? Because if we look at our function, we're just strictly using count. Okay, so now
Distinct,
this is,
right? Or no?
you could, yep, that is a way. So let's do that one now. Again, you're leading right into my hand because, yep, so let's call it, what did I call the other one? I'm going to call it count distinct product. My way too long typing. So now let's do it as, we could go through count and we could come through here. Actually, it is distinct count. Some languages use count distinct, some call it, this one happens to use the function called distinct count. Counts the number of distinct values in a column. So we're going to come back to product, go back to product category, select it, put another card visual here. And now when we put it on there, we get the value that we probably expected the first time. So it is important to know the difference between these. And also go read the documentation, because count distinct, I can't remember if it counts the blank. If you have blank rows because you have RI issues, you have values missing, I think count distinct counts the blank rows. And then there's a technique, I think values will not count the blank row. So you could do values and count that. Okay, but now let's, so this is all working off of the product table. So let's do the same type of thing working off of the sales table. And so let's first do our count of product ID that's in the sales table. So we'll call this count sales product ID, count sales product ID. Any guesses on what this is going to come out with?
An enormous number.
I'll take that. And I'll even take that as being correct. 3 million.
There you go.
Okay. Because
Every
again, we did the same thing as conceptually what we just did with product category up here, right? We're counting every occurrence there. But now if we make a new one and we go back and say, okay, what I might really have wanted, if I could talk, is count distinct sales product ID. And just to show something a little bit different, I'm going to do this. I'm going to introduce a couple new functions. If you don't know, to get a second line or another line, you have to hit Shift and Enter to come down. But we're going to introduce, again, using variables. So I'm going to call it var. I always tend to put an underscore at the beginning of my vars as a best practice. The only one I don't do that on is my variable called result. It would, I don't know why I don't, but I do with all my other ones. So I'm going to call it var, and I'm going to say values product ID. And so I'm going to use this function that we were talking about called values and just get it to get product ID. Okay, so that just returns me a table because a variable could be of any type. So you don't have to, which again kind of comes into that variant thing that we were talking about. But a variable could be a constant, it could be a table, you know, a single value. In this case, it's going to get me a table of product IDs. And then because I have to use a return, I'm going to just do return count. I actually like count rows better. And I could put my variable in here. And this is going to do the same thing as if I did a distinct count on the product ID in the sales table, except I put the wrong table here.
This will take care of the blanks, though, right?
It will not count a blank, but usually in your fact table, the blank's not going to be there.
That's true. I just, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll save that. Add another card. And, oh, there it is. Sorry, I couldn't find it for a second. So now this tells me a little bit of a story, right? Because this count distinct, the number of distinct values that I have in my fact table versus what I have in my dimension table, there's almost 1,400 products that we've never sold in the time span that this data has.
Yeah, but we still got like $400 million a year in sales. I mean,
well, yeah. I mean, we're kicking butt, so we don't care, right? So that's, you know, this is probably more of how you want to do your comparisons. I think this is a good example of the exception to the rule, right? Is you want to know how many products that you have in your system overall versus how many products have I ever sold. And now this one, if we put this down into a matrix visual, this is really where the differences are going to come up. So talking about year, let's put it back into year again. I don't know why it's only there in the hierarchy. Huh. Let's choose fiscal year just for fun. And then we're going to put our product measure. And we're going to use this one that's getting 2412. And so we're going to do just count of product ID. And you see we always get 2412. And then if we change over to what our distinct count is to say what, you know, which ones have we actually sold, count distinct sales up here. So now what we could do is write another measure because we know this is going to stay consistent. That if we wanted to say, what's our percent of products that we have defined that we've sold, right? We could do the divide and come out with that percentage. But that is where, you may not want to say, how many products do I have in the, how many distinct products that I have in the fact table, because you may not have, there could be one you have never sold. In this case, we got a lot that we never sold. It's all depends on how you want to set up your percentages as well, right? So, but that would be a common use case. I see Siri tried to tell me something about lower, and I missed that. I was looking at what I was doing.
I think that's when we were
Okay.
guessing it was lower or higher on the number.
Oh, that was her guess. Gotcha.
Kevin, it's also a good sort of visual reminder that the total row is its own calculation. It's not totaling the rows above it. I guess counts are always, not always, but a count distinct is going to be like that.
So that is exactly where I wanted to go. I'm glad you reminded me because I didn't even think about bringing it up here because we talked about it in the beginning.
Excuse me, I have a question about the count distinct. So if you're counting distinct sales, and that's giving a number of how many products are sold, why would we use distinct, and why wouldn't we want to count all the products sold?
Well, because in this case, if I wanted to say I wanted a percentage, right? But of all the products I have defined, I have 2,412 defined. In 2018, I have at one or more sales for only 779 of them. So I can turn that into a percentage, right?
Yeah, and I just want to make sure, because Regina, are you saying you might want to count the number of units sold? Because that's sometimes when people count products, they're counting, like, I sold 100 of these, I sold 100 of this widget, 400 of this widget, which is a different measure. And is that what you were asking about?
Yes, that's what I was thinking we were doing with this.
Yeah, and you would write a different measure. You would start using your quantity on that. But again, the question that I'm trying to run to here is, what's the number of products that have at least one sale in the year, based out of all of the products I have defined? Okay,
that have been sold, just in general, not the number of sales, but have
correct.
Been sold. Okay.
Correct. Right. So now I could subtract these two numbers. I could divide them. I could come up with different metrics to say, right, are we missing an opportunity because, we have 2,000 different products defined, but we're not selling all of them. Why did we invest in these thousands of products that we're not selling?
Because they're made with oil. Sorry.
Maybe. But to get back to what Amin brought up, I do want to point this out. You see this number is 1,036. See these numbers above it? I don't know what they add up to, but I know they add up to a whole lot more than 1,036. The reason being, because remember we were talking about there's going to be 5 executions of that count distinct, right? It's going to be once for 2018, once for 2019, 2020, 2021, and then again for the total. So now the total doesn't have the year as a filter on it. So that's why it goes back to getting this 1,036, just like we had on our card with no other filtering on it. But this doesn't visually total up to this number. I would debate with somebody that this is the correct number to show, but I have also had use cases to where this one's probably not a good use case, but that you do want to get this visual total to match these added up. And let me see, because I think I have the code to do that. Yes, yes, I do. Okay, so I'm going to show you a technique for doing that. It gets us to be a little bit more advanced DAX. So we're going to call this, I'm actually going to copy name over, and then the code, and then we'll walk through this code. Okay. So the first thing that we're doing, if I get this to format a little bit nicer, is we're producing a variable that's off of the distinct count. It's all line 4. That's interesting. Okay. So the first thing we're doing is we're producing a variable that's going to hold the table, just like we talked about before. And you can see I even named my variable to have table on it. And this is where I'm off. It's going to use add columns and summarize columns, or summarize. So it's going to since we're working inside out, it's going to first do summarize date year. So what that's going to do is when this executes, it's going to produce a table of all the years that are currently within my context, within scope is the way I usually say it. And then it's going, so imagine you're going to have an imaginary table. They're called virtual tables. It's going to be built in memory. So it's going to be built on the fly every time this measure runs. And it's going to have that list of dates. When there's only one, or list of years. When there's only 1 year, there'll only be the one of them, all right? And then it's going to add a column to this summarized table that is going to calculate the distinct count for, it's got to be off of sales for product ID. And so now when this completes running, I'm going to have either one row, a one row table with one distinct count value, or I'm going to have a 4-row table, right? For the total, I'm going to have all 4 rows with its own distinct count. And then I'm going to use another sum function, and this is where we get into the sum x, right? So the x just says, I want to tell you the table to use to do the summarization. So in this case, the first parameter is the table. I'm going to pass in my variable table, and then I want it to summarize the column called add distinct count, and then return that result. Okay, so now if I save this, and assuming everything worked right on my copy paste, which I think it did. So now if I come in and I add this to this matrix, right? It's a matrix visual. So you can see each one of my years gets the same value that it, oh, this didn't work. Huh. Why did that go up? It didn't do that in my other one in in my test model, it didn't do that. That's weird. But I got the same value at the bottom here.
Yeah, I don't know if I mean, I was going to say, I didn't really follow what the summarize is actually doing. I mean, if you want to.
Yeah, so let's walk through that again to see if I could even figure out. I must have changed it somewhere. So again, summarize, that function goes from here to here, right? So it's going to say summarize the date table for me off of the date year. So it's going to just produce a table that is the set of years that are in scope when this runs. Then the add columns goes from here to here, right? Because we could put our cursor there and we can see where that ends. And it's going to add this column that I'm calling @ distinct count. And it's going to do a calculate distinct count sales product ID. So it should move the filter off a date and year over to this because I'm wrapped within a calculate. And do the distinct count of the product ID off of sales. Should have come up with the same value. Let me see if I could open my
Kevin,
other. Go ahead.
You might try returning that year count table as the instead of the result, just to see if we can get it to show you the data.
Well, remember, a measure cannot.
Oh,
A measure can't return a table.
Yeah.
So I'd have to rewrite this.
Sorry, I was thinking DAX. I was thinking I was in DAX Studio.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Let me open my other model real quick. We're almost at 7:30, so this is going to probably be where we end anyways. Let me introduce this because I have a model where I already built all this out. Maybe I didn't capture the code correctly. Anyways, that's what it's doing. It should have returned the exact same value. Where is this trying to connect? I can't do it there. Too many IDs.
I mean, while we're looking at this, I don't know if anyone else notices, it's interesting, this at distinct discount in line 5, which is like dynamically generated, this column, and then it gets referred to in line 9, you know, without the quotes around it, like it's known and that works.
Right, because I'm passing this table in. And so now this is a virtual table that has a column of date and year in it, and it's got a column named @ distinct, so I could reference that column now.
That works with SumX, but you couldn't, I mean, sum won't do that, right? You couldn't do sum of year count table bracket discount. That's
right,
why
because you have to use SumX in order to pass the table name in.
Okay.
Let me see if I could sign in with a different user and get this thing to work. That's not the one that I wanted. Got all these models. Let me get rid of that. I'm going to kill my machine here in a little bit, everybody.
Yeah, by the way, this is how playing with DAX usually winds up for me.
Yeah, see, this is a perfect introduction. I'm actually going to stop there before I try to save myself. I'll figure out what I did wrong. Count this thing. But it should work.
Well, is it possible that Power BI Desktop is broken?
No. I know you love to blame all of that on there, but no, it's not.
It's always the tools.
I have a quick question based on this
Sure.
measure.
Yeah, save me.
in add columns, we are passing the calculate DAX function. That calculate function doesn't have any filters to it. So why don't we just say distinct count and avoid the calculate?
That's an excellent question, because what the calculate is doing here with this summarize is it's passing, it's taking what's on the row context, which is going to be the date year, and it's pushing it to this distinct count as a filter. And so that's what's going to allow it to filter by date, by the year.
So if we didn't have calculate, add columns will not be able to push the row context.
If I did, it would not pass the filter context. So if I comment this out and it's corresponding, now what it's going to do is produce the same distinct count on sales product ID for every row. So let's go ahead and do that. Because it is a good question. And
it's funny, the total
still
changed. Wasn't the total not 3,100? Wasn't it 25?
Yeah. So it's doing it, it's working differently. I still would have expected. I must have some other filtering going on somewhere. I don't have any other filters on this page. If I look back at my presentation, see, because this is my sloppy notes. I had it working in another model. I just can't figure out where I put that model and what ID I need to have signed in. And they matched up. And then this value adds up to these values.
I think the picture proves it. Worth 1,000 words.
But this code doesn't prove it.
Oh,
And this code didn't work exactly like I expected.
So, and Sam has asked a question.
Let me put it here. I want to just add it on a whole new thing to make sure I don't have.
Yeah. And I think this partly answers Sam's question. Sam wrote, how to debug which filters are getting passed. And so one approach is to start a fresh page, which has no page filters, no visual filters. That's kind of what you're demonstrating.
Yeah, I know what I did differently. Because this is I don't know how the fiscal year is built. Let me change this out to year. Put year on rows. Because I was sitting there going, well, why did I only have 3 rows there?
20, but that doesn't add up to 3,100.
I bet you it does.
No, that's the 25 and change.
Also, we're not, we got to go back and put that calculate on.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
But if we say 809 plus 852 plus 881.
You don't have a numeric keypad on your keyboard?
I was doing it so y'all could see me.
Oh, I see.
So now, right, so it is interesting that I didn't expect this part to work here, but the grand total is off. So let's go back into this measure and uncomment the calculate around it. And I got to get the right measure. Sorry. Want this one. And let's take this back off so it's sending the row context over correctly. Save it. So now we get the 2542 we expected.
Which is great. I don't know who it was who asked that question about what the calculate does. Yeah, I I don't really understand what we saw before, where you took the calculate out and yet it was still, oh, I guess because that row induces a filter context because it's in a matrix. Not right. So that because it's in that row 2018 of the matrix.
Right. That introduced, I think you're right. That for the row values, it introduced the filter context itself. But when we got down to the total, there wasn't any filter at all. So I don't know if there's bad data in here, that there's things that don't have a date to it. There's blank values and stuff like that. That's not being shown here. I'd have to look deeper into why that came out high. Oh, I know. I know what that number is. Hang on. I could tell you now. What is 1036 times 3? Oops. That's the number we had, wasn't it?
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that is a number.
So that's what's happening there, is just like so when it's going through just the one row, 2018 would be in scope for this distinct count. That's why it was coming out correctly on each row. But when we did the total, it had, the table had 3 rows, 2018, 2019, 2020, and it just did the distinct count for everything, not by row, not by year context. And so that's why it got, come on, go away. That's why it got the 1036 that it would get over here. And it got it, it added it 3 times to come out with that 3000 number.
That's very cool to kind of work through that. Sam has another question.
That's a very good DAX example.
Yeah. Sam has a question about the type of visual impact of filters, like a matrix versus something else.
Kind of, I would say, but anything that you put on any visual is going to impact the filtering, right? So even if I change this to be a cluster column chart, I still have the date, the year filtering down here. This is where we get the funny year stuff going on. So I'm basically behind the scenes of every visual is going to have a table produced, which is also why you could say show as table. And you see the table values down below here. So I keep wanting to try to say yes, but I'm keep coming back to say, no, the type of visual doesn't impact it, because it's going to generate a DAX query that's going to produce a table. And it's whatever you're putting on there as your axis, or the other slicers, visuals that you have on the page, whatever other filtering, that's going to impact the overall DAX query. Now, of course, what I'll leave you all with, I know we're going really long, is a lot of what I would start looking at to learn DAX as well is look at doing the performance analyzer and record it. And then right here, I could say, analyze this visual, and it's going to produce the DAX query for me. And I could copy that, put it into another tool and look at it. And I would expect that the query between this visual and the matrix visual would probably come out exactly the same. But then you start reading through these queries, and that takes your learning DAX to a whole new level. All right. Love it going long, because I always do. So just like before, I'm able to get through this slide. We didn't get into any of the time intelligence stuff.
That's funny. It's almost ironic. Like we ran out of time.
I did it last time, and I went about this long too. So probably shouldn't introduce all this. We could do this at another session where we have some time. But it's really just providing the calculation, right? Using calculate, using the right functions for the time intelligence function. All the time intelligence functions that you have out there, all they're doing is changing the filter context on the date table. And so once you kind of think about it that way, you have the concept down and go, okay, how am I changing the filter context? You could either use those functions and know that that's what they're doing, or you could write, for some very sophisticated time intelligence, I've had to write some of the stuff myself because the functions didn't work the way I wanted to. All right. I'm going to stop there. I'm actually going to go back to the original presentation because I did want to introduce a couple things for future month. So this was our monthly meeting. We also have a Thursday lunchbox meeting where we do a lot of discussion just like this. This is why a lot of us are just so familiar with it. Is every week at lunchtime, we're doing a workout Wednesday from the 2022 series. And we do that on Thursdays at noon Central Time. So join us, have conversation. I don't know if Siri's still here, but Siri's been leading us quite a bit on those lately. She's been doing a great job.
Thank you, Kevin.
Oh, you are here. And, just anybody that has done the exercise joins in and, or we try to do it if nobody does, if nobody's done it there. I'm going to put another link in the chat, which is a report. That's not what you want. That would have been the DAX code that I had. This is a Power BI report that I keep up to date about all the meetups they occur around the world. So if you want to get more Power BI training, definitely look there. I have started noticing some user groups going in person. And I'm going to bring that up here for our August one because we have an opportunity to go in person if we want to. But let's work through first May. I have a presenter lined up, a good friend of mine, Belinda Allen. Her year this year is all talking about end user adoption. And so I think every Saturday when we get together as a group, I know Donald joins that group as well. She introduces it. Every topic that we come up, she finds a way to spin into user adoption. So she's been curating this presentation, giving it a few times. As always, when we give it, we keep improving on it or learn some other ways to change it. So I think it'll be a good idea. It's kind of focusing on, you put a report out there, people may or may not be using it. What do you do? And so she's really been studying that topic. June and July, I currently have open. So if anybody knows of a speaker or wants a certain topic, reach out to me and let me know. And then if we don't do it in person in August, I can move this guy up, Treb. He's presented on Power BI goals to other groups that I've been in, and he gives an excellent presentation on it. I have just implemented Power BI goals and a scorecard at one of my clients because they wanted to watch something. They were having a cash flow problem due to bugs in a particular system. And so we quickly, within a couple of days, put reports together to show where they were at based upon the data. And they said, okay, how do I get a burn down of that so that I could see how much it changes every single day? And they wanted it like the next hour. So I didn't have time to write this sophisticated data warehouse or anything else. I remembered about Power BI goals. I connected up goals to that visual. And sure enough, every day it would grab the updated value, and we could see the trend that it was taking and how quickly everything was getting resolved. So it's an excellent, he's going to give the presentation from a much higher point of view than that. But I think it's going to be a really good one. On that, if we got just another minute or two, what do y'all think about trying to do in person in August? Should we try to go in person or should we try to still keep virtual?
This is Michelle. I don't mind trying in person as long as it's in, I guess, a well-ventilated space with space between people, just enough to make people feel comfortable.
Okay. And maybe what it means, I need to reach back out to the right people at Microsoft to see if their office is opening again yet. So I think we'll talk about it during the lunchbox sessions in April and try to make a final decision. So I could get back to Treb and when I think he's coming through Dallas for something else. So it's not dependent on him making the trip. It's just he happened to be here, so he's thinking he could do it.
I mean, I'd even be okay with going somewhere, a restaurant or something where we could all sit at the table with our laptops and, you know, we're all clicking through it and watching it and discussing it real time with each other. We're just not lined up right next to each other like we used to be in the before time.
Yeah. Okay. More to come. Okay, on that, again, I know I went very long. I probably need to eat soon, but if does anybody have a burning question that they want to put up to the group, you know, something that they're having struggles with at work that we could help out with?
Kevin, you want to turn off recording before that?
Oh yeah, let me do that. Thanks.